The entire restaurant went silent when the billionaire leaned back in his chair, looked directly at the exhausted waitress, and began speaking in a foreign language he was certain she could not understand. A few wealthy guests smiled behind their glasses, waiting for the humiliation to begin. The waitress stood perfectly still, holding a silver tray against her trembling hands. Then the billionaire said one final sentence in that language, and the color drained from his face when she answered him fluently. Before we uncover what happened that night, if you believe kindness can change a person's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Your support helps us bring more stories of compassion, courage, and unexpected second chances. It was a cold Thursday evening in Manhattan, New York, the kind of evening when the sidewalks reflected the golden lights of expensive restaurants and black cars waited outside polished hotel entrances. Inside the exclusive Belmont house, every table seemed to belong to someone important. Lawyers whispered over steak, investors discussed markets, celebrities laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, and waiters moved between tables carrying plates that cost more than some families spent on groceries in a week. At table 17 sat Adrian Whitmore, a 39-year-old billionaire whose name appeared regularly in business magazines. He had built a technology empire from almost nothing and was famous for being brilliant, impatient, and brutally demanding. That evening, he had invited several international investors to dinner, hoping to close a deal that could expand his company into Europe. Everything had been arranged perfectly. The private dining room was reserved, the wine had been selected, and his assistant had made sure nobody disturbed them. Adrian believed control was the foundation of success. He controlled his company, his employees, his schedule, and, as he had begun to believe, almost everyone around him. Then 28-year-old Hannah Brooks arrived at his table. Hannah had been working at Belmont House for nearly 11 months. She was not there because she dreamed of becoming a waitress. She had once imagined something very different for her life. Before circumstances forced her into restaurant work, Hannah had studied languages at a community college in Pennsylvania and had hoped to become an interpreter. She had a remarkable ear for languages and could recognize accents with an accuracy that surprised even professional translators. But life had interrupted those plans. Her father had died after a long illness, leaving behind medical bills and a small mortgage. Her mother, Margaret, suffered from severe arthritis and could no longer work full-time. Hannah had put her education on hold and moved to New York because Belmont House paid enough for her to keep a roof over their heads while she continued taking occasional online classes at night. Every morning before work, Hannah called her mother. Every evening after her shift, she took the subway home, prepared dinner, sorted medication, and studied until her eyes became too tired to remain open. She rarely complained. She had learned that sometimes strength was not about having no problems. Sometimes strength meant carrying them quietly while still finding a reason to smile at strangers. That evening, Hannah approached Adrian's table carrying a bottle of sparkling water. She greeted everyone warmly and checked that they had everything they needed. Adrian barely looked at her. He was already irritated because one of his investors had arrived 12 minutes late. When Hannah asked if he was ready to order, Adrian impatiently told her to give them another minute. She stepped away, but a few moments later returned when the table was ready. What happened next began with something small. Adrian ordered an expensive bottle of wine and asked Hannah to repeat the vintage because he thought she had misunderstood him. She repeated it correctly. One of his guests laughed and told Adrian that perhaps the restaurant had sent them a new employee who did not understand high-end dining. Hannah heard the remark but said nothing. She had learned long ago that responding to every insult only gave the insult more power. The evening continued, but Adrian's mood became increasingly hostile. A steak was slightly overcooked. One investor's glass was empty for nearly 30 seconds. A sauce was served separately instead of on the plate. None of these things were serious, but Adrian treated every imperfection as a personal offense. Hannah apologized each time, even when the mistake was not hers. She quietly replaced dishes, refilled glasses, and kept moving. Then one of the investors mentioned a recent business trip to Madrid. Adrian smiled and began discussing a European expansion plan. He spoke about contracts, translators, and international negotiations. Hannah happened to hear a phrase from the conversation and instinctively recognized it as Spanish. She had studied Spanish for years. She also knew enough French, Italian, Portuguese, and German to understand basic conversations. Adrian noticed her listening. He looked at her with a faint smile, as though an idea had just occurred to him. He asked one of his guests if they wanted to hear something amusing. Then, without warning, Adrian began speaking rapidly in Spanish. His words were deliberately insulting. He described Hannah as incompetent, uneducated, and beneath the people sitting at the table. He joked that she probably could not understand a word he was saying. His guests laughed nervously. Hannah stood beside the table with her hands clasped in front of her. She understood every word, but she did not react. Adrian became bolder. He continued speaking, adding cruel comments about her uniform, her tired appearance, and the assumption that people like her existed to serve people like him. He believed the language had created a private space where he could humiliate her without consequence. Then he said something that changed the entire atmosphere. He told his guests that the funniest thing about people like Hannah was that they spent their whole lives trying to serve people who would never remember their names. Hannah lowered her eyes for a moment, not because she was ashamed, because she was trying not to cry. She thought about her mother waiting at home. She thought about the electricity bill on the kitchen counter. She thought about the textbooks she had purchased and never finished. She thought about how many times she had been told that her dreams could wait because survival came first. Then she looked up and answered him in fluent Spanish. The smile disappeared from Adrian's face. Hannah did not raise her voice. She did not insult him back. She simply explained, in perfect Spanish, that she had understood everything he had said from the beginning. She told him she had studied languages for years and had once planned to become an interpreter. She explained that she had no reason to be ashamed of serving tables because honest work was never beneath anyone. The room became so quiet that the faint sound of silverware from another dining room could be heard. Adrian stared at her. One of his investors slowly lowered his glass. Hannah continued speaking, still in Spanish. She said she had learned something from her father before he died. A person's character was revealed not by how they treated powerful people, but by how they treated those who could do nothing for them in return. Then she switched back to English. She told Adrian she was sorry he had felt the need to humiliate her, but she hoped someday he would understand that wealth could purchase comfort, influence, and opportunity, but it could never purchase dignity. Adrian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, the man who always had an answer had absolutely nothing to say. But the story did not end there, because Adrian's embarrassment quickly turned into anger. He asked for the restaurant manager. Within minutes, the general manager, Thomas Caldwell, arrived at the table. Thomas had known Hannah for months and respected her deeply. Adrian demanded that she be fired immediately. He threatened to cancel his company's contract with the restaurant and promised to make sure the ownership group heard about what he called unacceptable service. Thomas looked at Hannah. She expected him to side with the billionaire. Instead, Thomas calmly asked Adrian what exactly Hannah had done wrong. Adrian struggled to answer. She had brought every order correctly. She had apologized for delays she did not cause. She had remained professional while being insulted. And most importantly, she had never insulted him. Thomas told Adrian that Hannah would not be fired. The billionaire stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. He told Thomas that people like him did not understand how the world worked. Hannah watched him leave. She thought that was the end. But the following morning, something unexpected happened. Thomas called Hannah into his office. He told her that one of Adrian's investors had contacted the restaurant. The investor wanted Hannah's name and asked whether she would consider helping with an upcoming international business conference. Apparently, the investor had been so impressed by her language skills and composure that he believed she had a future far beyond waiting tables. Hannah almost laughed. She told Thomas she could not simply abandon her job. Thomas smiled and explained that nobody was asking her to abandon anything. The investor had offered to pay for a professional language certification course and help her apply for an interpreter position. For the first time in years, Hannah allowed herself to imagine a different future. But Adrian Whitmore had not forgotten her. Several weeks later, his European expansion project encountered a major problem. The translation company his team had hired had mistranslated a crucial section of a contract. The error threatened a multi-million-dollar partnership. Adrian's executives were desperate. Meetings were delayed. Lawyers were involved. Investors were losing patience. Then Adrian remembered Hannah. At first, he refused to contact her. His pride would not allow it. But eventually, desperation defeated pride. He went back to Belmont House. Hannah was working that afternoon. When she saw Adrian enter, she froze. He approached her table. This time, he did not speak like a billionaire. He spoke like a man who had finally realized that money could not solve everything. He apologized. Not a polished corporate apology, not the kind written by lawyers. A real apology. He admitted that he had humiliated her because he believed wealth made him superior. He admitted that he had been cruel because he thought nobody around him could challenge him. And he confessed that her response had forced him to confront something he had spent years avoiding. He had become the kind of person his father had once warned him never to become. Adrian's father had been a factory worker who raised him after Adrian's mother died. The old man had taught him to work hard, respect people, and never forget where he came from. But as Adrian became successful, he slowly replaced those lessons with arrogance. He began measuring people by money, titles, and influence. Hannah listened. Then she surprised him. She agreed to help. Not because she had forgotten what happened. Not because she wanted his approval. She agreed because she understood that helping someone become better was more powerful than punishing them forever for their worst moment. For the next several days, Hannah reviewed the disputed documents. She discovered that the problem was not simply a translation error. A cultural phrase in the contract had been interpreted literally, completely changing the meaning of a crucial clause. She explained the issue to Adrian's legal team. The deal was saved. Adrian offered her a large financial reward. Hannah politely declined the amount. Instead, she asked him to fund scholarships for restaurant workers who wanted to study languages or continue their education. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he agreed. Within a year, the Whitmore Foundation established a small scholarship program for hospitality workers pursuing education. Hannah became its first program coordinator while completing her own certification. Her life changed slowly, not magically. Her mother received better medical care. Hannah returned to school. She eventually became a professional interpreter and later helped organize language training programs for service workers across several cities. As for Adrian, he changed too. He started visiting restaurants without demanding special treatment. He learned employees' names. He began asking questions instead of issuing orders. He even developed a habit of leaving handwritten thank you notes for staff who went out of their way to help him. People around him noticed. His company changed. His employees noticed. But the person who noticed most was Hannah. One evening, nearly 2 years after that humiliating dinner, Hannah attended a foundation event where Adrian was speaking. He stood before hundreds of people and told the story of the waitress who had answered him in a foreign language. He did not reveal her name. He simply said that a woman he once tried to make feel small had taught him the greatest lesson of his life. He said he had spent years believing success meant being powerful enough that nobody could tell him no. Then he learned that true success was becoming the kind of person people felt safe saying yes to. Hannah sat quietly in the audience. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand. When Adrian finished speaking, the audience stood and applauded. Hannah did not stand immediately. She looked at her mother. Margaret was crying. Hannah smiled and squeezed her hand. Her mother whispered that her father would have been proud. Those words broke something open inside Hannah. She remembered the tiny apartment where she had once studied after midnight. She remembered counting coins for groceries. She remembered crying silently in the subway because she did not know how long she could keep fighting. And she realized something. Her life had not changed because a billionaire had noticed her. It had changed because she had refused to let someone else's cruelty decide her worth. That night, Adrian found Hannah outside the event hall. He thanked her again. Hannah told him he did not need to thank her. She said the important thing was what he chose to do after realizing he had been wrong. Adrian nodded. He told her that was exactly what he was trying to learn. They stood beneath the city lights for a moment, two people who had entered each other's lives under completely different circumstances. One had entered with power. The other had entered carrying a tray. But in the end, it was the person with the tray who carried the greater lesson. Because dignity does not come from money. Respect does not come from status. And kindness does not require wealth. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who has every reason to be bitter, but chooses compassion instead. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories for more stories about kindness, courage, forgiveness, and second chances. And before you go, I want you to answer one question in the comments. If you were Hannah, would you have forgiven Adrian after what he did, or would you have walked away forever? Your answer might inspire someone who is struggling with the same choice in their own life. Because sometimes, the people we underestimate become the people who teach us the lessons we never knew we needed. And sometimes, one quiet answer is enough to change an entire life.